the sorts of issues that have become very obvious is that the first initiatives were talking about stopping deforestation. Well, everybody wants that. The tragedy of the loss of the world's forests over the last 30 years is, you know, in my view, one of the great sort of global crimes of our species. But you cannot solve that problem in isolation, because really what we have is a spectrum of what people see as deforestation. And in many cases, deforestation starts when the first road and the first chainsaw comes into a forest. And that's as true in the US, it's as true in Australia as it is in Brazil, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea or the Congo Basin. And so how we actually deal with the issue is critical, and the way that this process has decided to deal with it is to say, well, we can't deal with deforestation in isolation. We also have to deal with forest degradation. Now, if you like, deforestation is just the end point of a lot of forest degradation. But this process has no definition about what forest degradation is. It has a very poor definition of forest, and it has a very, very poor definition of deforestation, which is related to that definition of forest. Now, what this process is currently seeing as forest is anything which is more than 2 metres high, that has a canopy density of more than 10%. Now, and it's an area that's only half a hectare. Now, on that basis, anything that's got woody vegetation is a forest. Now, if you're living in the forests of Tasmania like I do, where we have 400-year-old giant eucalypt trees, beautiful understory of 40-metre high rainforest beech trees, we don't see that a plantation of eucalypt, which is 15 metres high, it's planted in a straight line, it's harvested every 15 years, there's no understory, there's no biodiversity, there's chemicals used to establish those trees. We don't see that there's really any equation between those two things. And it's the same if you're in the tropics. If you're a forest dweller in Sumatra or PNG, you have a pretty clear view about what a forest is. You know, there's lots of big trees, there's small little gaps in it, there's lots of understory, there's lots of birds and animals, and you depend upon those things. And an oil palm plantation, which is marching over the hills, you know, in a smoking ruin of a landscape, is not a forest. But this process sees it as a forest. Now, there are very, very real consequences associated with not dealing with that issue. And we can see the consequences from what's happened in the last process, so under the Kyoto Protocol. Australia was able to claim, and from my perspective as an environmentalist, legitimately, that it was a good thing if Australia could slow down its rates of deforestation. And this was largely focused on the forests and woodlands in the north, in the state of Queensland, and a little bit in the state of New South Wales, where there has been a very significant reduction in the clearing of those trees for agriculture. However, at the same time, we've seen a historically high rate of forest conversion, where old growth and natural forests are converted into short rotation plantations. And because of the way these rules have been written, that is not counted as deforestation. What the atmosphere sees is even more emissions than the deforestation in Queensland, on a per hectare basis, and the loss of biodiversity is almost complete. So functionally it's deforestation, but the convention doesn't see it as deforestation. And so in Australia's case, they made a decision that they would not account for their emissions from forest management because it's voluntary. And under that system, they don't have to. So they didn't account for any of the emissions from that plantation conversion process. Now, we now know, when we look at the numbers that we've got available to us about the emissions associated with that practice, that it was probably close to equivalent to the area that was saved in terms of carbon emissions in the north of the continent. And so we cannot possibly see those kind of perverse outcomes happen in a REDD mechanism, where the country is effectively incentivised to turn primary forests or even secondary forests into a plantation because it's not deforestation. So that's the most extreme example. And my challenge to everybody involved in this process is that the parties is this is a problem. Everyone here who I've spoken to and the many other organisations who are actually identifying this as a problem, I'm telling you, you have to fix this problem. You cannot leave a situation where this is possible. And unless you fix the problem, it will remain possible. And what we know about the exploitation of natural resources everywhere on the planet is if there is a resource and a loophole to be exploited, it will.